What up, Oasis people?
What up?
Hey.
We're back. We got another episode, but to be honest, it's a little bit more of a somber one. We can't.
Yeah.
We should have just started low key. What up, Oasis people? Talking about bitterness and cynicism. It's gonna be awesome. But to get us rattled off, to get the excitement, the blood pumping as we dive into this topic, what is a conspiracy theory that you cannot get behind? Like, no matter how many people try to tell you one way, like you're just like, that is not true. Go for it.
I'll take it back home because there's one from where I'm from in Rapid that there is this thing at Mount Rushmore called the Hall of Records, and it was a thing that Gutzlum Borglum, the guy who carved Mount Rushmore.
That's a name.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's exactly how you say it, but it's close.
Close enough. But he wanted to, behind Mount Rushmore, carve in like this giant hallway and giant room where like the precious documents of the country would be stored. It's like the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, stuff like that. And there's supposed to be a granite sign at the front, and I think there actually is, that says until these stones erode away, neither shall these documents. And it's supposed to be like this huge protection chamber so that like our original documents of the founding of this country should never fade away until literally the rocks around it erode. But it never happened. It's just a giant empty carved out hallway with nothing in it. And people think that in that hallway that it didn't not get finished, that it did get finished, and we're hiding things like aliens or actually the documents back there or like National Treasure's City of Gold, which is totally wrong. It's just a giant granite hallway with
Okay, so
nothing
it
at the end.
is.
It does exist.
Okay.
The hallway is there, the room isn't. Because it was supposed to be like a 70-foot hallway that led into this giant
fancy
room.
Okay.
Yeah.
I've not heard about any of this before.
No. But it's
South
behind.
Dakota natives, sorry.
Yeah.
There.
It's
We didn't learn
behind
this in Indiana history.
behind the heads,
Okay.
up on top, and if you get up there, you're probably going to get shot first. But
Well, do they have like guards just like watching
yeah,
it?
security,
Really?
yeah,
All the
I've
time.
also never been to Mount Rushmore. So.
Don't mess with
What?
Don't mess with the president's heads.
yeah.
You've never been? All these times you've gone to Rapid, you've never been?
Okay, so here's the story. When I moved out here, I had never been. And so
Yeah.
then I was like, I'm intentionally not going to go
Yeah, that's
and
the
make it my
worst.
thing. You know, like, oh yeah, I've lived in South Dakota for X amount of times
character
and I've
trait.
never been.
Go to
Yeah.
Rapid City 3 times a year.
Yeah, exactly. But when we were out for a staff retreat, myself and another staff person did drive past it. So I have seen the heads, but I've never
It's
actually
cool,
been.
isn't it?
It's okay.
No,
Just
it's awesome.
Faces carved in a
Every
rock.
time I see it, I'm like, yep, that is cool.
Back
I
home
mean,
we-
if I sat and thought about it, it's probably cool. Like, how do they do that? But
Yeah. We need to move
the
on.
jackhammers
history
and
and story behind it is not cool.
We're
But
getting sucked down to a rabbit hole. Jaena, why don't you hit us with your
Oh,
conspiracy
I didn't
theory?
think about this hard enough. Some of the ones that I think are the most ridiculous are like that big name celebrities who have like tragically died actually didn't
Like
die,
Tupac?
like faked their death, or like Michael Jackson isn't
Elvis.
dead, or like they're just like hiding out and they've just like changed their identities.
Yeah.
I don't have a specific one in mind, but I just am like, no, they probably died.
For me, I've had this debate too many times in the last 6 months,
Oh boy.
and it's Sasquatch or Bigfoot.
Yeah, we
oh
have
yeah,
talked about
I
this.
can get behind that.
People are like, yeah. And there's a couple people here on staff. I won't name names. But there's a couple people who want me to affirm the idea that Sasquatch could exist. They're not telling me he does exist. They want me
Yeah.
to open up my mind to the reality that he could exist. They're saying there's all of this land mass in the northern world, like upwards in Canada or Siberia and over in Russia. Like they're saying there's all this land mass that could house an entire semi-human species, like a Sasquatch, that we just don't know about. And I cannot get behind that.
I've seen way too many TV shows about it that are so obviously fake that it's ruined it for me.
Yeah.
Yeah. I
I
can't do
still
it.
would need to know, better understand what Sasquatch is.
I don't know. That's part of the problem.
Big walking
Yeah.
monkey man, right?
Is he bear? Is he monkey? We don't know.
Yeah. Is he really a crossbreed? Is it just some crazy like bush
No,
person
people-
that's been living in the wild for too long?
I think
These
people think it's
sightings
like
are,
it's like a entire animal group. Like it's not just one lone Bigfoot, right? I think it's like there are Bigfoots.
Oh, really? I
Yes,
haven't heard
like
that part
there's
of
a whole colony of Bigfoots out there somewhere, and we've just never
Bigfoot
discovered
village.
it. Yeah, crazy.
Big footies.
All right, we talk about
Big hoodies. That's it. I believe.
We spend too much time on conspiracy theories for this podcast because we're talking about bitterness and cynicism. And when we come to some of these things, you could probably hear it in my voice. I'm a little bitter about Sasquatch, but I'm also super cynical. Yeah. And each one of us, when we talked about these different things, there's different emotions that'll arrive. But that cynicism part can be really key in our disbelief. So let's start by just throwing out some classic Oasis definitions. What is bitterness? And then someone else can tell what's cynicism.
Yeah, bitterness is anger and disappointment being untreated, treated unfairly, or just general resentment.
Yeah.
Yeah. So then cynicism is an attitude or that's characterized by general distrust of the motives of others. We're both stumbling over our words. So cynicism then will have characteristics that come and reveal themselves.
Yeah. So like in both of these, the reason we talk about it is because it creeps up on people.
Yeah.
And I think it's really easy to point at an older generation and say they're bitter and they're cynical, but I feel like we're seeing it even more and more in our generation. Yep. That's like people are bitter and cynical as 18 to 25-year-olds. And that I maybe it's true and it's happened in the past too, but I just feel like it's even more prevalent now. So why would we start and talk about this? Because we know it's contrary to Jesus. Like where would we point people to even just start this conversation?
Yeah, I mean, of course, we go to Galatians 5. We look at the fruit of the Spirit, which is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, gentleness, faithfulness, and self-control. And then even prior to that in Galatians 5, Paul says, so I say, walk by the Spirit, and you will not gratify the desires of the flesh. For the flesh desires what is contrary to the Spirit, and the Spirit what is contrary to the flesh. They are in conflict with one another, so that you are not to do whatever you want. And so, like, this legit the opposite of what we're called to do by, like, expressing the fruits of the Spirit. That bitterness and cynicism are a lot of the opposite of what we would call the fruit of the Spirit.
Yeah, and Paul has called us in Galatians 5 to live contrary
to the
flesh.
Yeah.
So I think we live in a generation right now, or a time period where we're really feelings-based. We've talked about this on staff a little bit, that we're really inclined to go where our feelings are leading us. So if we're bitter and we're just okay being bitter. Or if we're cynical, that's just how we feel. It's just the reality we live in. In some ways, it's just our truth. But the scripture here is teaching contrary to that. How would you, like, say you're sitting with someone and they're saying, hey, I feel these things, but you see the scripture telling them to live in a different way. We're going to get into practicality later. Yeah. But how do you start to walk out these two opposite ideas?
Yeah. I think, and we've said this before, that our feelings are valid, but they're not, I'm blanking what's the word.
Real, but not always reliable.
Thank you. Yeah. Real, but not always reliable. So the feelings that you have, that's okay to have them and to recognize them, but it's always good to evaluate why those exist. So what is going on that is causing these feelings, the bitterness, the cynicism, and begin to evaluate that and unpack that and maybe seek healing or restoration and whatever may be leading to those feelings.
So the question almost becomes not necessarily the feelings, but what are you doing with the feelings?
Yes.
Yep, totally.
Or even like where are the feelings coming from? Like we oftentimes like to look downstream. You know what I mean? Like we're feeling this thing, and when we start to look where can I go in the future? What can I do to change it? But a lot of health can come in looking upstream. Like what made me feel this way?
Yep.
What caused me to feel that cynicism and that bitterness?
Yeah.
And part of it is just this world we live in.
Yeah.
Right? Like let's talk about that for a second. Why is bitterness and cynicism so prevalent in the current world?
Yeah, well, it's going to be prevalent in every time period in the world, because we know that this world is broken and that there's fallenness. In John 16:33, it reminds us, it says that in this world you will have trouble, but take heart, I have overcome the world. Like it is recognized that this life, this earthly world that we live, is going to have hardship, is going to have trouble. And so we're bound to experience this. But the reality is that because of Jesus and when we trust in him, we can see the victory through it.
Yeah, totally.
And I also think, like, I don't think we have to try and persuade anyone that we're selfish people. And so when you go back to the definition of cynicism, that it's the attitude characterized by a general distrust or the motive of others, we think it's our way or the highway.
Yeah.
And so when we don't see our way come to fruition, or we have to do it some way different than the way we'd like to or plan, we automatically, like, vilify that person who says, no, I think we need to take this other road. And so in a culture where we can easily share our opinions, our thoughts, our directions, there is such a huge like boiling pot of like, no, it's my way or the highway, and cynicism all over the place.
Yeah.
That it's now like me against the world. So we just want like, it's the only thing that matters in the world is what I want.
Yeah.
And now you try and place that on everybody else, and you're gonna be cynical.
Yeah, and totally, like, even in my silly Sasquatch example, it's like they're trying to get me to just open my mind to the idea that, and I'm just like, that is so dumb. And that's probably how we respond to a lot of things.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, you're a liberal and you have someone who's a conservative and you're trying to exchange views, but you're like, you are so dumb that I can't even get to that place, you know, or this, or vice versa. You got someone who's a conservative looking at, or you got someone who's a Christian looking at someone who's Jewish or someone who's Muslim, someone who's Hindu, and you're like, you are so dumb. Like, I don't even know how you understand that, how you get to that. And we're just so closed off to the ideas that other people, and not worth that we're saying you need to change your ideas in any of those, you know, like if you're a Christian, we would advocate you stay a Christian, but like there's this cynicalness that is of a hard heart, that is this unwillingness to listen and receive and bounce ideas off of each other. And do you feel like, okay, this is a question. We've talked, cynicism and bitterness are linked, but do you feel like one leads into another, or like one feeds another, or are they like simultaneous? How does that work, do you feel like?
I feel like maybe bitterness would come before cynicism.
That's what I was thinking.
Yeah.
That cynicism is the culmination of a lot of bitterness, or repeated bitterness. So, yeah, but I think they can also both exist at the same time.
Totally. Yeah, it's not like one stops when...
Maybe this is wrong, but I think I've always thought of bitterness as a feeling or emotion, and cynicism as a disposition that you kind of take on, that usually encompasses a lot of bitterness and frustration. And maybe that doesn't totally match up with the definitions we gave, but like you can say, like, I think often you hear like, he's a cynic, or she's a cynic.
Yeah, I'm cynical.
Yeah,
it's just descriptive.
That's just like who I am.
Yeah.
But a lot of people can experience bitterness even if they're not cynical.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Yeah, that's good. And it to me, it feels like I would answer the same way. Bitterness is this process, this feeling that gets you to a place of like cynical nature. It's almost like the hardening of the heart to the part where your heart is now hard. You know, like cynical is describing the reality that you now exist in, whereas bitterness might be what got you there and what you continue to experience while you're there. Right. How do we reverse that? Right? That's the key, is if we recognize it's contrary to the fruit of the Spirit, it's contrary to the way of Jesus. We're supposed to exist in love, peace, hope, joy, like trust, like, but yet we experience these emotions. We maybe have that hard heart. Where do we go in the first place to overcome those things?
Yeah. We'll start with forgiveness is a big part of this. We look in Scripture, we can see over and over again where forgiveness is prescribed as just the healing aspect of different hardships in life. So we can look at Matthew 6:12. It says, and forgive us our debts as we have forgiven our debtors. That's from the Lord's Prayer, a part that Jesus commanded his people on how to pray, that we could forgive in the same way we've been forgiven. We can look in Ephesians 4, verse 32 says, be kind and compassionate to one another, forgiving each other just as in Christ God forgave you. And so this is a big way to fight bitterness. Forgiveness is to take that step to, forgiveness is kind of twofold. It's for the person that you're forgiving, but then also for yourself as well, to not hold on to the hardship and the negative feelings and the bitterness and cynicism that often we can face.
And as we started this podcast, we talked about being bitter or cynical towards ideas. And some of that is true, but the ideas quickly become being bitter and cynical towards the people holding the ideas. Right? That's where we really strike at the heart of some of the evil of it. Because it's okay to disagree with an idea or to think an idea is dumb. But when you start to disagree, or when you start to think people are dumb, or when you start to mistreat people and you start to not validate people as people, that's when it's a really slippery slope into not the way of Jesus. So is there a difference, do you feel like, as you've experienced it, or as like you see others experience it, between the bitterness that is between ideas and people? Like when their heart becomes hard not only to an idea, but to a very person. Like how does forgiveness play into both of those? Because you don't really have to forgive an idea, right? But this call of forgiveness is an antidote or a remedy towards a hard heart towards people. Kind of shotgunned a lot of questions at you.
No, I think maybe where I would go with this is, there's one quote that I read somewhere. This like, it is hard to like hate or like be bitter towards someone if you understand them. Like if you don't understand somebody, it's super easy to hate them, to be cynical towards them, to be bitter towards them. But if you like take time to like sit down with them, understand, like, why did you have this idea? Where is this coming from? What tweaks can we make so that we're both on board with this?
Yeah.
Is there a way that I can see your point of view and you can see mine and go into it with an open mind? Now that's a whole conversation of how you get there to have that conversation with an open mind, but to go in there like prayerfully asking God, like, would you open my heart so that I can, you know, receive well in this conversation, so that I can be at peace with this idea, with this person. And so then I'm not attaching the idea and my dislike or distaste of the idea to that person and making their idea and my distaste of that their identity for me.
Yeah. I think that's so good because it's like my example goes to I'm bitter towards a friend because of something they did to me, and now I'm cynical towards friendships in the future. I think that's a reality. Someone's probably someone listening is probably experiencing. Like, I had this relationship; it was going great, either romantic or just friendship, and something happened where now I'm bitter about it. I'm hurt about it, and I find myself cynical towards it. And in that, most of the time when people hurt other people, they don't do it just for the spite of hurting other people. You know, like most people, not all people, most people don't have the intention to just go out and hurt other people. They do it out of a defense of their own insecurities, their own trauma, their own brokenness. So you might have a friend who, hey, they lied to you and that hurt you and you're no longer friends to them, but they maybe lied to you because the thing they lied to you about, they were insecure about themselves and they started to try to cover up that insecurity in lies and deceit. Or like you had a relationship where two people, you were romantic together, boyfriend and girlfriend or whatever, and like one cheated on another. And it's like, oh, they probably didn't cheat on you because they left that day thinking, I'm going to cheat on this person. They did it probably because they have a wound in their past where they don't trust well. They lack commitment. They're not honest with themselves and their feelings. They don't know how to process. And there's all this trauma and this wound that becomes part of like, so then if you're able to wrestle with some of that, I think it removes like, oh, I hate this person. Or like, I'm so bitter at this person, which it's okay to feel hurt if you've been hurt. But part of it is, okay, I see all the wounds and the hurt and the trauma and the struggle that they've been through. And I can be upset that there's sin in the world. And now I can process in forgiveness that maybe they're not as awful as I thought they were. Because I see some of the pain. I see some of the reason they got to that. That's good.
That is super good.
Let's look at the example of Joseph.
Yeah.
Want to go for it?
Sure. So when I look at the story of Joseph, oh geez, remind me what book this is in. Is it Genesis?
Yes.
Okay, good. For a second I got nervous. So I'm gonna say the wrong thing. So the story of Joseph, he has like 12 brothers or whatever.
Yeah, he's one of 12?
One of 12?
12, yeah.
Yeah.
Even with the youngest one, or is 12? Is the youngest
I think
one 13?
he's one of 12 because they become the 12
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Jeez. Okay.
You're good.
Bible
she just took a
literate.
nap earlier.
I did take a nap.
Still waking
I'm
up.
good. No. But so Joseph has the favor of his father, and his brothers are jealous and upset about it. And they basically kidnap him and fake his death and then sell him as a slave.
Yes.
Which is crazy.
They're going to kill him.
They're going to kill him.
But then they're like, one of them's like, hey, we should probably make some money off this guy. So then they just sell him into slavery.
Yeah. And so he ends up in Egypt, and he ends up just kind of rising in power to eventually gets to a point where his brothers come to him asking for need and to meet a need that they have. And he has this critical moment where he can choose to punish them for what they've done to him, or to forgive and to begin to restore the relationships that exist. And that's the route that he takes, which is just absolutely an amazing, like, to get there. Like, it's crazy. Like, these are your flesh and your brothers, and they like were literally going to kill you, and instead sold you into slavery.
Someone out there is thinking about their sibling dynamics, and they're like, "Oh, we got it so bad." And Joseph literally was sold into slavery by his siblings.
He was on his own, ganged up on by 10, 11 other guys.
Part of the story I like, and sorry, I don't mean to cut you off. Part of the story I love is when you read the interactions he has with his brothers when they first come back. There is some bitterness there. there is some cynical part of him where he's trying to wrestle with, what do I do?
Yep.
They don't recognize him, so they don't even know who they're interacting with, but he absolutely recognizes them. So there's this power dynamic in play. There's all of these emotions and feelings. This is the first time he's seen them in so long. They're at his disposal. He could literally kill them if he wanted to. Like, revenge is at his fingertips, and he's wrestling with that.
Yeah.
There's a power dynamic there, yet he chooses over a little period of time. He messes with them for a second, but he chooses in a period of time to forgive.
Yeah.
And there's a beauty in that. I mean, it really starts the nation of Israel's growth to prominence. They become the nation. They become this huge group of people under the protection and blessing of Egypt. That becomes a problem later. That's why we have the Exodus. But
yeah.
But yeah, I even think without that, if Joseph wasn't forgiving, because he was second in power to Pharaoh, like, he could have easily, like, nope, you guys are gone.
Yeah.
Like, there's Israel also completely gone. 12 tribes gone.
Yep.
Like, non-existent. So
Yes.
that completely, just this one moment of forgiveness shaped all of the history to come.
Yeah. I mean, the removal of his bitterness and cynicism was part of God's ordained plan to bless and bring about the restoration of the world.
Yeah.
Like, what? You're sitting there thinking, I'm bitter at this friend. Like, I'm sitting here thinking I'm bitter about this thing. And it's like, oh, maybe God really wants to remove that and use it for his glory.
Yep.
Whew. That's crazy.
Man.
What's a practical way to walk about forgiveness, just like Joseph did? We see it in the New Testament.
Yeah. To first of all, trust the sovereignty of God. To get rid of the fancy word, to trust that God's in control.
Yeah.
Romans 8:28 would say, and we know that all things happen to us. Oh my goodness. And we know that all that happens to us is working for our good if we love God and are fitting into his plans. Like, God's in control, that we can step back and, like, his plans will still come to fruition, that we have power and also no power, that we can come alongside God and work for him, and work with him and co-labor with him. Or we can step back, get out of the way, and his plans are still going to come to pass.
Yeah.
That we can either help or get out of the way.
Yeah.
So yeah, even just by trusting in that, we know that, like, good things will come because he is in control.
Yeah.
Because he is all good. So
Yeah.
You could probably go back one episode and listen to the sermon where Brennen talks about this.
Yup.
Ta-da. It'll be the
Maybe
one right before this.
If you just don't turn this podcast off at the end, it'll come up next.
Nice. Yes, preaching God is in control. I am absolutely in love with this message. I love it so much. So you should listen to it. Anyways, continuing, another one would be like managing expectations. That sometimes we get bitter or cynical because we had unrealistic expectations of people or ideas. That we thought this idea or this, job, school, club, organization, we thought they were going to bring us this thing. We had these lofty expectations, and it didn't come through that way. And now all of a sudden we find ourselves bitter, and then we're cynical about joining X, Y, and Z. Like, we've done, I feel like church hurt comes up every single podcast episode, but we had expectations of what the church was supposed to be. It was supposed to be this perfect representation of Jesus. It's supposed to be this place where I never have to do conflict because everybody's on this radical pursuit of Jesus. It's this expectation that gets shattered because the church is a group of broken people trying to pursue like healing and wholeness. And then we find ourselves bitter because we've been hurt, but now we're cynical about joining church again. And we spread that cynicism to others. And in some ways, we're church hurt evangelists that try to bring other people's church hurt out of them and like try to, I see it, and it's hard. And it's real. It's true. But that starts from a place of mismatched expectations, whether it's with an organization or just people.
Yeah.
Like, I can't tell you how many people I've had to, as a pastor and as a friend, they've gotten bitter or cynical about me or my role or what I do. And it's like, it's because they expected things of me that I couldn't provide. Like, I couldn't be Jesus to you. I couldn't heal that wound. I couldn't provide for you in that way. And so now they're bitter and cynical, and it's hard. But forgiveness is, again, back the...
And we're also people who love jumping to conclusions. That we don't have the right expectations because we always assume things. Like, I know I'm the worst at it as well. I don't listen to like the outside things. I'm like, all right, I already assume what's happening like in your mind, inside of mine. So like,
you already write the narrative of well, they did this because of this.
Without ever talking to you about it. And that's hard. Like, we live in a culture that does that. Like,
Yeah.
So now you've wound yourself up in bitterness and
Yeah.
cynicism around some faulty idea that might not even be true.
yeah.
Right? So it's like, oh, they did that because they don't like me, and now I'm hurt and bitter and cynical. But really, they didn't do that at all.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
It's like, oh yeah, I've been hurt and pent up and like all wound up for the past 2 weeks, and then I go have a quick conversation. Oh, that was all for nothing. Like, that was totally not like I totally did that to myself, and it's self-sabotage.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Pastor Aaron
absolutely.
here at the church, he talks about it as writing yourself into the center of the narrative.
Yep.
That everybody in this in the whole world is living their own individual lives.
Yeah.
But when it comes to us, we are very quick to assume we are at the center of the narrative. So they did that because of me. They acted in this way because of me. They're feeling that because of me. It's like, oh, maybe they have a whole nother string of things, you know? Yeah.
Yeah.
We're quick to do that.
Yeah. So then the ways to combat that are to choose to be an optimistic person and to be optimistic about other people.
Totally.
And to believe the best in others. And then I think communicate expectations.
Yeah.
Talk with people about if you have an expectation of someone, talk with them about it.
Yep.
Is it something they can meet? Is it not? Sometimes it's just they didn't know that's what you expected of them. And they maybe could. They just didn't know.
Yeah.
So communicate.
We can't read each other's minds, so
Yeah, unfortunately.
You got to ask. One of the things I just thought, oh, there's a pastor who I used to listen to all the time, and he would always say that his initial disposition when he's offended is they didn't mean it.
that's
So
great.
every single time someone hurts him or wounds him or says something or does something that he doesn't like, he tries to have this initial disposition, this initial gut reaction is they didn't mean it. And as he walked it out, he like explained, he's had people come up to him in his foyer and say really mean things to his face, and like he instantly tries to think in his mind they didn't mean it. Like they 100% in their mind maybe meant it. They came up to you and said that sermon was garbage. It was trash. I don't like the way you communicate. I think you're terrible. And he's like, they didn't mean it.
Yeah.
But this changes his whole demeanor in this, and it in some ways shields his heart from bitterness and cynicism because bitternism. Nice.
There you
Let's go.
That's
Because
the
he's
title of
trying
the
to
podcast.
assume the best about people, and he's not writing himself in. So literally, he's seeing this person have this outpouring of hurt, and he's saying that's probably not coming from me. You know, it's probably somewhere else in their life that is just overflowing into me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's why he says they didn't mean it. That even if they would sit down and say, I did mean it, like he's saying they didn't because he's trying to protect them and believe the best about them. I thought that was really cool. I don't do it. I've tried to do it. I'm working to do it. I think it is a good place, but
Yeah.
man,
that's
it is hard.
Yeah, that's rough.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it would protect my heart better. You know, because I do the same thing as probably everybody listening. And I love to assume people are always thinking about me and my feelings when they choose to do things. And most of the time they are not.
Yes.
And also, I think like comes back to think of like the fullness of life is to live at peace with everyone, and like you can't really experience a full life if you're like this person like hates me, or like I hate this person because of this. Like if you've ever had that moment of like miscommunication where like you've assumed something, and then you have that conflict resolution, it's like, oh, like I feel so much better. Like there is a huge weight lifted off. That's why we're called to live at peace with everyone, because that's where the fullness of life is found. Because you can't live in the fullness of life with that weight, with that burden of bitterness and cynicism on you.
Yeah. And lastly, this conversation orients just around what's in our heart and how we feel in a lot of ways. So what would we tell people just to end if they feel they're so stuck? Oh my goodness, I'm just dying over here today. If they feel they're so stuck in bitterness and cynicism, what would we tell them to just, hey, start here?
Yeah.
Let God transform your heart. Like you have the Holy Spirit in you. If you believe in Jesus, like you have the presence of God within you who desires to refine and transform you. And so like bitterness and cynicism can make your heart hard. And in Ezekiel 36, verse 26, we can see just put into play where it says, I will give you a new heart and put a new spirit in you. I will remove from you your heart of stone and give you a new heart of flesh. So that we can be renewed. Like, this is something that like, go ask God about. Like, give me that new heart. Like, desire that. Like, I want a heart of flesh, not a heart of stone. So
Yeah.
Yeah.
Pray for it. Ask for it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, he wants to answer that prayer. So if you feel bitter, if you feel cynical, hopefully one of these things can help you today. But if you need something, always you can reach out. Peace out from the Oasis Podcast, people.
bye.